Good morning. Thank you all. Hello. Thank you all for being here. For the new faces, because there are new faces here this morning, I'm Justin. I'm our coordinator of family and youth ministries here at the church. So Chris, our regular senior minister, is out of town on vacation for the next 2 weeks. So I want to introduce Dr. Lisa Barnett, who will be teaching our class this morning. As you can see, she's Associate Professor of American Religious History at Phillips. We're very excited about this class. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm all wired up and everything's good. So a couple of things that you have to know. First of all, my fall semester started last week with an intensive concentration class in disciples history and polity, and so from 8:30 to 5 Monday through Friday last week I was teaching a class, thus the voice has not fully recovered yet. I always teach that in August as a concentrated week, and it's a lot of fun. And then yesterday, instead of resting all day, we had a visitor from the Disciples of Christ Historical Society in town, our new senior archivist, who came and audited the class, and she had never been to Oklahoma or Tulsa, and so we spent the day going to Greenwood, to the Woody Guthrie Museum, to the Bob Dylan Museum, and so yeah. So I apologize for the voice. I'm sure it will last. And secondly, this is a course that I teach at Phillips Theological Seminary. I developed it a couple of years ago. Julie, I think, audited that class a couple years ago. I revised some things. I did it again in June. And I probably plan to offer it again. So obviously that is a week-long class. I'm just kind of condensing for 4 Sundays some highlights, but I am sort of taking some of the structure. So for today, just some general observations and then some of the early cultures' views of the afterlife. Next week, we'll get into the Greco-Roman, Judaism, Christianity views, and then we'll go into some of the, church fathers, Middle Ages, and some of the literature, i.e. Milton, Dante, particularly right. And then the last one, we'll kind of talk about more modern kind of concepts of hell and try to bring everything all together. I tell my class at Phillips, I got my ticket to hell. Trust me. People have told me I've already got my ticket. And that's the thing I think that has been so interesting to me, is this concept of an idea that over history gets played out, it gets built upon, it gets in some ways weaponized, and it gets used in some instances to do a lot of harm to a lot of people. Not just the fact that to accuse someone that you're going of hell, but this constant kind of, for some folks, this concern about, will I end up in hell, right? If I do this, what, will God forgive me, etc. I mean, it can be burdensome. And so that is some of the things that prompted me to introduce this topic. And I say, you have to understand, I did not grow up in the church. And when I say the church, I mean any church. My family did not go to church. It was later, kind of my senior year, with friends going to a church and a camp experience before I went to college, that, I was introduced really to religion and made that confession of faith, and then learned more theology about that denomination. I'm like, no, we'll find another one, and that's where I ended up in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. But my family didn't go to church, and so when my father died, a few years later, I started at Bright Divinity School. And my mom came to me and she said, when I visited one time, I don't know if your dad was ever baptized. Does that mean he's in hell? I'm not going to tell my mom that my dad's in hell just because, he didn't have some water thrown on him in an official way. And so that then kind of led me theologically to start tearing apart and deconstructing this concept of what is hell, and to come up with, what the hell? Right? Oh, I have a new nameplate. I'll bring it next week. I've been dubbed Reverend Dr. What the Hell at Phillips. and the student gave me a little placard for my desk there. So I'll just kind of go through some stuff today, and I'll try to leave time at the end, yes, definitely, so that there are questions that, we can do the microphone and passing the microphone. And I also, Corinthia, I wasn't sure, but I made about 16 copies of the PowerPoint for people particularly who may have issues seeing the screen. I'll try to make some more next week, but if someone wants one to kind of follow along, that's fine as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wasn't sure the numbers, though. Justin's like, we average around 15 or so, so I'm like, okay. But I'll do more for next week. So when we talk about hell, we are talking about an afterlife, right? And we Western folks, we like to think in binaries. So if we say there's a heaven, right, then there must be an opposite, which is dubbed hell. And the particulars of afterlife existence really do vary from culture to culture. But hell is one of those two principal after-death destinations for the soul or some surviving personality, at least in the Christian religion, and others as well. Other world religions do have hells of their own with some surprisingly familiar scenery, and that's one of the points that I really want to make. No culture can stay really intact with some of their views and their traditions once they encounter other cultures, right? Unless you live in a bubble, you are going to be exposed to other viewpoints, and that's great. And you can take some of those viewpoints and you can graft them onto some of your own traditions and some of your own beliefs, and that's syncretism, right? And then create something different. And so a lot of what we see in this idea about hell is influence of other cultures that have come through that then get reinterpreted by some within Christianity and even different sects within Christianity that how it's interpreted. So that's why I'm saying other world religions have that, and we've kind of borrowed and pick and choose what we want to graft on. So the investigation is sometimes geographical as well as theological and psychological. How did this idea come to be thought of? The landscape of hell is really one of the largest shared construction projects in imaginative history. And that's the argument I am making. It is an idea that has been constructed. Exactly. And so we take that and then we try to claim it as fact, as truth, and yet it is a social construction, much like race, much like gender, right? Even religion in general, I argue, but in Peyote Politics, my latest book. But I got to put that shameless plug in there. But this social construction and its chief architects for hell have been some very creative giants in the world. Homer and Virgil and Plato and Augustine, particularly Dante, Milton, Goethe, Blake, etc., etc., etc. Not necessarily, Augustine and some, but more some of the literature that has come through and influenced Christianity. So hell, the place of punishment for those sinners, has always been taken much more literally, perhaps because it's easier to understand. Again, that binary. Well, if heaven is spiritual, then right, hell has to be, oddly, we've made it fleshly, right? To kind of bounce off some of our ideas of sin around the body. Tortures that hurt, an atmosphere, you talk about the sense of smell and flesh burning or, things like that. So hell is very much visceral in terms of our body. And again, it may be this constructed reaction to some of our own uncomfortableness with the body, the human body. So anyway, according to a Gallup poll from a few years ago, 60% of Americans believe in hell, or at least say they do. And only 4% think they're likely to go there. I can agree with that. There's the, there we go. So that's kind of around the world. Right? So other than, Hitler or the latest serial killer or maybe the latest politician, who will go to hell, right? So among Christians, it's, it's kind of this idea of how we're defining sin and who then gets to go. Sandy Shapoval, our dean of the library, has this wonderful book. It's about this thick with a red cover, and it's the who's who of who's in hell that has been kind of compiled and put together. It's fun. But again, this is what I'm talking about here is a real history of an imaginary place. So from 2017 to 2020, the belief in hell by the country, and you can certainly see on the map, the United States is kind of 60 to 70%. That fits with that Gallup poll statistics. The red, though, in other parts of the world really do show some of the, quote, fruits of our missionary work in the 20th century, right? Yeah. So etymology-wise, there we go. The modern English word hell is derived from Old English, hell, hele, first attested around 725 CE. So even the word itself, 725 Common Era is relatively new, to refer to a netherworld of the dead reaching into the Anglo-Saxon pagan period. So it's that encounter with pagans, non-Christians, that suddenly we now need a word in Old English to identify where those people might go. And so the word has cognates in all branches of the Germanic languages, and all forms ultimately derived from this reconstructed Proto-Germanic feminine noun, interesting, of hallo, a concealed place, the underworld. And upon Christianization, then, of the Germanic peoples, the extension of that word was reinterpreted to denote the underworld then in Christian mythology. Every religion in the world has its own set of beliefs about the afterlife. And again, ideologies differ, but most of them do now have some sort of version of a heaven and a hell concept. And here you go, basically, the simple story. Good people get rewarded with paradise, heaven, while sinners, however you define that, and that then implies a power structure of who gets to define what sinners, that category, they get to be punished in a wicked place. So punishment in hell, we think, typically corresponds to sins that are committed during your lifetime. So in a way, then, by creating this category and associating it with behaviors now, someone in power gets to control people and gets to control their behaviors with this construct of hell. Now, sometimes those distinctions are specific, with those damned souls suffering for each sin committed, but a lot of times they're much more general, with condemned sinners relegated to different levels of hell or a different level of suffering, right? So in a lot of religious cultures, including Christianity and Islam, hell is often depicted as fiery, painful, harsh, inflicting suffering on the guilty. But there are other traditions that portray hell as cold. I may be one of those people. Hell for me, I will end up in a very cold place, right? Buddhists, particularly Tibetan Buddhists, the description. But notice too, if Tibetan Buddhists, the geography, right, that influences how they then construct hell. Certainly the South, Texas, and Oklahoma, hell is fiery. Right? And if your air conditioner goes out, right, you experience then a little taste on earth of what hell will be like, right, for all eternity. And in fact, in Dante's, among Christian descriptions, Dante's Inferno portrays that innermost, the ninth circle of hell, as that frozen lake of blood and guilt. So it's kind of that combination there. But cold also played a part in other earlier Christian depictions of hell, beginning even with the Apocalypse of Paul, or kind of around the 3rd century, the vision of Drytelm by the Venerable Bede from the 7th century, St. Patrick's Purgatory, the vision of Tundal, the vision of the monk of Incham, all from the 12th century, and then the vision of Thurkel from the early 13th century. So you've got different depictions about even cold. As I said, around 56% now believe in hell, and it remains a threat that is invoked by preachers, particularly, and adherents to Christianity. Fire and brimstone. And recently, there has been an uptick, sadly, in those more fundamentalist biblical interpretists who believe that even small sins deserve eternal damnation, and who also invoke some of these early Christian hellscapes as a way of justifying and legitimizing their attitudes about premarital sex, homophobia, and what categories now we get to send people to hell in. So this struggle over hell and conceptions of it unveils what studies of early Christian apocalyptic literature have long demonstrated. Our imagined hellscapes say more about the biases of the culture that constructs them than the actuality of an eternal inferno. So let's take a look at how our culture, right, kind of informs some of our notions of hell. Because even if I didn't grow up in the church, right, but I had an understanding of hell from TV shows, from, pop culture around me, from songs, Metallica music and Megadeth, kind of that stuff, right? So a lot of our views of hell are really influenced by culture. We can even go back to some of the frescoes in the medieval church. This is from one in Bulgaria. And you see again the fire and the devil, right, and the minions there, but this kind of fleshing out of eternal punishment. Here's the boss painting an angel leading a soul into hell. Even the title has some theological implications there, right? An angel leading a soul to hell. Thanks, God, right? For the escort. But again, the fire and the brimstone. Here's one, even Muhammad, along with Barak and Gabriel, visiting this concept of hell from the 15th century. And then Giotto's The Last Judgment, this fresco, right? You notice, the seat and the heaven, right? The separation, that binary of the heaven, and then down in the lower right corner there, this grotesque sort of body figure with the physical bodies that are there. And so even the angels, the body is sort of still there, but it's kind of been transformed, where the physical body in hell is just really, different. So this website that's here, I won't show this, but some of the scenes, but it kind of lists the top 10 depictions of hell, and several of the movies on that top 10 I've seen. You've probably seen as well, with different genres. Even like Little Nicky, right, with Adam Sandler and some of the comedies. Look at Walt Disney World. Disney Productions have picked up the story of Hercules is the story of an afterlife. And again, a lot of the stories of the afterlife get grafted onto our concepts of what our afterlife is with this construct of hell. And I love South Park. I'm a South Park fan, and I'm so thrilled that South Park is really back. But, from 1999, the movie there, and again, Satan kind of in a separate realm. You can substitute different characters that are there now. But that, even like the Big Book of Hell and The Simpsons, right? There's Homer goes to hell there. Futurama did a scene on robot hell, Oh, I'm so excited. I have tickets to go to Oklahoma City in October, but I've seen it twice already, the Book of Mormon. And the whole little scene, the Mormon spooky hell, Mormon dream, right, is, and you can find some of those little excerpts in the video clips, but even the lyrics to the song kind of convey what we talk about. Here's Ned Flanders. And I really like this, the idea of personal hell. Because that's what it is. A lot of times we construct this idea of hell, but we also graft onto ourselves this construct of I'm in hell here. So in terms of geography, it's not just after I die. And this is really kind of more where we're coming into a 20th, 21st century understanding of, and I think theologically this makes a whole lot more sense when we talk about the kingdom of heaven is here. Well, the construct of hell is also here, and we've helped create it by a lot of our actions, right? So that idea of a personal hell. So today you're getting a little bit of my humor here as well that students get. The irreverent humor. So reasons that people would end up in hell. So I've done this collection the last few years. Well, those who drive too slow in the fast lane are going to hell. Those who don't use a bookmark, but turn the page on the book and dog tag it there. Okay. There's exactly exactly. So why else? I'm dragged to hell after Jesus showed me the memes that I laughed at. Or when you laugh at something you shouldn't have, so you pre-book your place in hell. And there are different types of hell. Be careful what you put out on your sign. Do you know what hell is? Well, come hear our preacher. And I'm happy, if you don't have a copy of this, if you want one, I'm happy to email you a PDF. You can share your email with me afterwards. I'm a grammar person, so in hell, you're surrounded by people who say, especially and irregardless, right? And so grammar hell, for me, it's math. Math is a living hell, right? Welcome to hell. Here's some math homework. And look, the most awful thing from hell is math, right? No offense for those of, and not to discriminate for those of you science nerds, welcome to science hell, or those who don't like science. This is Tony. He once saw something on the internet about your field of expertise and is going to spend eternity lecturing you on it. I think now we could probably have the history hell, right? You musicians, particularly if you're involved in the classical scene, banjo hell for you. I learned this with my nephew, and some of you might relate. We've gotten rid of the hot coals and switched them over to Lego pieces for the physical torment there. And then really and truly, again, some of our expressions. There is a town in Norway called Hell, and during the winter, it freezes over. So when hell freezes over, and for you TCU folks, right, yeah. Fight them until hell freezes over. Now, we will need the microphone if you have a question so that the online can...
I hate to waste your time with
No.
this, but a former colleague of mine, Dan Urin.
Yes, I had him in class, yeah.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Dan is from a town in Upper Michigan.
Yes.
Called Hell.
And there is one.
And it freezes over as well.
Exactly. So Norway, and yeah, another one of our students at Phillips also knows about Hell, Michigan as well, so I'm going to have to add that one in. So here's where it becomes problematic when we talk about hell in terms of religion. We get a lot of mixed messages. And it's those mixed messages and the cognitive dissonance that really creates some concerns for people around theology. I'm also a Big Bang Theory, right? And so here it is. Our religion is based on love, Sheldon, not fear. Well, what happens then when people don't follow the rules? Well, they burn in hell. Right? If God is love, then why? And that becomes the question for a lot of people. And then torture and hell awaits those who question God's love. Right? Those mixed messages. If you need the threat of hell to be a good person, then you're just a bad person on a leash. Amen. Right? Bullies, including the Christian sort, always justify their actions by their good intentions, and that's why the road to hell is paved with them. The use of the concept of hell to motivate faith in God is spiritual abuse. One of my professors at Bright, Dr. Sprinkle, talks about theological malpractice, right? Because some of these constructs do end up abusing people and creating harm for them. And then, of course, John Pavlovitz has said, if there's a hell, it should probably be filled with people who claimed faith in Jesus while trying to strip the sick of care, the terrified of refuge, and the vulnerable of protection, and reveling as if this was a righteous victory. So again, even we progressives, right, like this concept of hell to punish those that do bad things against other people. I mean, that sometimes is also the problem for us as well. So hell is not a singular concept handed down to us from the Bible. It has many permutations, each one serving as this spiritual kind of placeholder for the best and the worst of us. On the one hand, it shows our desires for justice, right? If life will not play fair, then we can at least imagine an afterlife where the wicked and the treacherous pay for their crimes, while the victims receive relief then from their earthly torments in heaven. But on the other hand, hell houses our hate, our intolerance and savagery. It puts on full display our own hidden desires to be proven superior over others and to punish those who don't conform to our beliefs. And so, like I said, I got my ticket to hell. And so on my first day in hell, this is what people are probably going to experience. We're going to be, first of all, looking for Hitler and making jokes about the heat, and then asking people, will you be my friend? And, testing to see if I can die harder than because I'm already dead, right? And reaching for my phone, remembering then where I'm at. So, the breakdown there. So I'll kind of go just briefly through some of these earlier views from the great below that have influenced us. From ancient Mesopotamia, the first accounts of the land of the dead that we know about were written nearly 4,000 years ago on these baked clay tablets from the Tigris-Euphrates Valley north of the Persian Gulf in Iraq. And Sumer is the earliest name we have for that region. The modern Sumerian scholars, right, have deciphered some of the code and their translations and brought us this legacy of the concept there. So the Sumerians were conquered by the Semitic Akkadians, and the area began to be known as Babylonia after the principal city Babylon. So the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the neighboring Assyrians are frequently grouped together as Mesopotamians, and they shared many of the same beliefs and myths, though their gods went by different names, much like Greek gods got a new Roman name, right, with a different empire that takes over. And so this idea of the Sumerian afterlife was a very dark, dreary cavern located deep below the ground. So now we're starting to get this understanding, at least of a geography, where inhabitants were believed to continue a shadowy version of life on earth. This bleak domain was known as Ker, believed to be ruled by the goddess Estrogal. And all souls here, notice this, went to the same afterlife, and a person's actions during life had no effect on how the person would be treated in the world to come. The souls in Ker were believed to eat nothing but dry dust. But here's what's interesting. Funerary evidence indicates that some people believed that the goddess Inanna, Ershkigal's younger sister, did have the power to award her devotees with special favors in the afterlife. And so a lot of the account of this development of a netherworld in the afterlife comes from a myth around Ershkigal, who rules, and her younger sister wanting to visit, but then being able to come back from this world, right? And so some of the sisterly teasing of Inanna going down and being able to come back. And it's just really interesting. But it has to be emphasized, though, that this Mesopotamian netherworld was not a hell. Although it's understood as a geographic opposite of the heavens, and its environment is kind of that inverse of the heavenly realms, like the darkness instead of the light, it did not stand in opposite heaven as a possible dwelling state of being for dead spirits based upon their behavior during the life. So this netherworld was neither a place of punishment nor reward. It's just an otherworldly destination for dead spirits whose bodies and graves or cult statues had received proper spiritual care. And so part of the funerary rites, it's not your actions during life that impact how you live in existence, or if you get to go to a heaven or just stay in this netherworld existence. It's how your grave, your body after you die, is taken care of by your family. Which is why even today when you go to the cemetery, sometimes you see the rocks, right, that are placed on the grave. That's still kind of an action afterwards that says we remember as well, but we're also kind of taking care, right? So there's some of that left over. So there's Ershkigal, the queen of the underworld, Inanna, Ishtar, the queen then of heaven, as well as goddess of love, war, and fertility, because when she does go down to see the netherworld, while there, Ershkigal has some fun and creates some characters, and Inanna comes back pregnant, right, from her experience in the world, the netherworld. So it's during the third dynasty of Ur, then, again, your afterlife depends on how you're buried, so I kind of jumped ahead. Those that had been given the sumptuous burials would be treated well, but those who had been given poor burials would fare poorly. And so you're starting to get this construct now by the 3rd century that the entrance of Ker was to be located in these mountains in the Far East, and it had 7 gates through which a soul needed to pass, right? So now you have, and there's a god who is the gatekeeper. Now we have this construction of someone gets to control who goes there. So the Mesopotamians did not view physical death as the ultimate end of life. The dead continued to exist in some animated existence in the form of a spirit. And there's a Sumerian term for that. But it's best understood as a ghost. I mean, if we're thinking in terms of translation. So even some of our own concepts of ghost and the afterlife come out of that Sumerian kind of culture. They have understanding and they have intelligence, right? They just don't have the body and the divine insight. That's what separates the ghost in the netherworld from those who get to go to the divine world. But it's not that necessarily strict body-soul dualism that we're really going to get in Greco culture. The ghost is sometimes described in some of the literature as just sleeping in the grave. It's not like they come back and they haunt or anything, but that's just the existence of them, kind of this state of sleeping, right? It's just maybe an eternal sleep. After a week teaching, I could use a long nap, maybe. So in ancient Mesopotamia, humans are considered alive as long as they had blood in their veins and breath in their nostrils. So when they're emptied of blood or exhaled their last breath, that's when their bodies are considered these empty cadavers. And that condition is that deep sleep. And then upon burial in the ground, the body that was, from their perspective, fashioned from clay returns to clay. And that biblical euphemism, right, for sleep that we also inherit from this particular culture. So it's the gala, primary purpose to drag those unfortunate mortals back to Ker. They are the ones frequently referenced in some of those magical texts, 7 in number, again, some of these numbers. And there's a lot of poems that describe the gala dragging the god Dumazid into the underworld. It's during the Akkadian period that Ershkigal's role as the ruler of the underworld gets assigned now to Nergal, the god of death. So we're adding more to the myth, adding more to the story. And now the Akkadians are attempting to harmonize this dual relationship in the underworld by making Nergal Eshkirgal's husband. So if Eshkirgal is the queen of the underworld, then we have to have a binary counterpart, right, complementarian, Nergal, the god of death. And you even get a lot of the ancient Sumerian language on this cylinder seal there, showing the god Dumazid being tortured in the underworld by the Galas. And so then we go to ancient Egypt. And with the rise of the cult of Osiris during the Middle Kingdom, the democratization of religion offers even the humblest followers the prospect now of eternal life. Moral fitness becomes the dominant factor in that suitability and sustainability there. So here's how ancient Egypt did it. At death, you did face some judgment. There's a tribunal of 42 divine judges. And if that person had led a life in conformance with the precepts of the goddess Mot, who represented truth and right living, then the person gets welcomed into the heavenly reed fields. If the guilty person was found, or if you're found guilty, you're thrown to Amit, the devourer of the dead, and condemned to now a lake of fire. And the person taken by the devourer is subject first to this terrifying punishment and then annihilated. So you're punished and then you go away. So this idea in ancient Egypt of purification for those who are considered justified in those descriptions of Flame Island, where the humans experience the triumph of evil over rebirth. And so for the damned, it's complete destruction into a state of non-being. Not just a deep sleep with, kind of that ghost figure, but after you're tortured and punished, you cease to exist, annihilation. That's going to be real important because it's kind of that concept of just non-being that later is going to influence early Judaism and some of the translations there of death. So there is an ancient Egyptian tale that describes the torment of a rich man who lacked charity, and when he dies, and compares it to the blessed state of a poor man who has also died. Where have we heard that before? So this divine pardon, right, at judgment always remained a central concern for the ancient Egyptians, that divine pardon. And so how this tribunal decides if where you're going is the weighing of the heart. Your heart is placed on a scale with a feather, right? And depending upon if your heart has done a lot of good things and outweighs the feather, you get to go and have eternal life. If the feather outweighs the moral actions of your life, then you get the torture and the annihilation as your punishment. Which at least the torture is like a temporary thing. It's not, everlasting. And so modern understandings of Egyptian notions of hell rely on 6 of the ancient texts. the Book of Two Ways, the Book of Anudet, the Book of the Dead is the one that is probably the most helpful for understanding some of that. And then sometime after the old Babylonian period, the Middle East produced a prophet named Zoroaster, who founded a long-lasting religion adopted by virtually the entire region, stretching up into what is today southern Russia and the eastern Balkans and eastward as far as India. And Zoroastrianism persisted until the Muslim invasions in the 7th century CE, and still survives in India, especially in Bombay, where Zoroastrians are called Parsis, Persians, and until recently in Iran. Zoroastrianism is also really the first monotheistic religion, one God. Avesta, the sacred book of Zoroastrianism, was not written down, though, until the 5th century CE, and then in a special invented sacred language and kind of never used again. But there are 4 extant held texts from the Zoroastrian tradition. Dating these texts is a little problematic, but the manuscripts kind of provide the only kind of reliable basis for us. Again, it dates back to a prophet, Zoroaster. We say prophet. Zoroaster never called himself a prophet, never intended to be a prophet. But the 4 extant held texts date from between the 6th and the 9th centuries. There are no contemporary English translations for some of these, although people have tried to take some of the data and reinterpret it in some of their own, but the actual word-for-word kind of translation hasn't been done. So, the Zoroastrian afterlife begins with a 3-day period after death where the soul sits at the head of its body praying for its future. Next, the souls have to cross a river that grows much more difficult as the weeping relatives now swell it with too many tears. So now we're kind of getting a shift in even how behavior at the funeral is expected. If you cry too much, it makes it more difficult for your loved one to cross the river, right? So that idea of holding back some of the tears. So this ordeal or the judgment that happens now on the Chinvat Bridge follows. And the soul meets the 3 angels of judgment, Mithra, Shrash, and Rashnu. And after the ordeal of judgment meeting these angels, there's this bridge then now that they have to cross. Now, some texts speak about this individual judgment, much like Egypt, balancing good thoughts and words and deeds against the opposites. But the judgment could also play itself out in the physical manifestations of the bridge, too, as either this wider walkway, right, for the good folks who allow them to reach the peak, or a very narrow, sharp razor edge that you have to climb. And if you can't make it to the top of the mountain, you fall off then into what it might be a hell. So judgment is kind of one of 2 ways. But after death, the soul meets also a young maiden who is the reflection of the soul's own thoughts and words and deeds. And that happens before you get to cross the Chinvat Bridge. And again, 4 texts kind of describe this Zoroastrian hell. The Book of Scriptures, Religious Judgments, and the Book of Judgments of the Spirit of Wisdom, and the Book of Artaviraf. That's the one, the video that I do show is all about body and a lot of the punishments related to bodily fluids. But hell is a gloomy and fiery place full of stench. And again, bodily fluids, right? And it's the Book of Artaviraf that describes in detail. Difficult to determine. It's about a person who has a vision who goes to hell and then gets to return to earth and describes those visions that they saw when they were there, those experiences. So it's difficult to determine whether he is looking down on hell and seeing this, or if he's actually passing through the scenes that he describes. But it mentions the river, the bridge, the hills, 4 places in particular, the place of evil thoughts, the place of evil words, the place of evil deeds, right? Hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil, and a desert then below the Chinvat bridge. And then it describes this unnamed, deepest region, the very dark, dark place, the pit, which is hell, where you really can't see. And since the texts don't comprehensively really describe the geography, it's difficult to say whether sinners are consigned to those specific areas in hell. We don't know a lot about that. But again, the prohibition against evil thoughts, words, and deeds, and the description catalogs sinners, right? We get this list. Naughty list that's coming out. Acts are either committed or they're omitted. So sometimes the sin of omission is just as bad in Zoroastrianism about what you could have done to do good, but chose to be complicit and didn't do anything. Yeah. And your sins correlate to the punishment. In particular, the book of Artavirith describes 85 punishment and specifies the sins that go with them. So both men and women are among those who are punished, with men slightly outnumbering women in the punishment. Children appear only to torment parents, but adults may be punished if they were bad children. So again, that notion, right, down to kind of that level. And so some of the usual sins in the Artavirith: sodomy, adultery, theft, lying, perjury, deceit, slander, extortion, making false covenants, breaking promises, and of course murder. Those are some of the more common. Does it sound like a list that we kind of start putting together as well in Christianity? So the standard punishment found in the majority of texts is for the wicked to be fed fetid and putrid things, bodily fluids, while waiting thousands of years in the company of demons until a final resurrection, right? So within this monotheistic religion, there is this notion of a heaven and a final resurrection and a good and evil fight that kind of plays out. Fire is present, but because of the special ritual of fire among Zoroastrians, it is not put forward, though, as an instrument of punishment, which is why we focus more on the body and just the darkness in the deep pit. So instead of the heat. So again, that is a manuscript from the 6th century to 9th century, authored in an early first-person account of someone who journeyed to the underworld. And this is a genre, right, that gets bolstered, providing, I was there, so it must be real, right? I write about it, and then other people buy it. So the soul, not his body, is what travels then to heaven and hell. It contains, as we know, 101 chapters. 85 of those chapters account Artavirith's observations in hell. The first 3 sections, we learned that then there's that river, right? The souls aided by the guardian angels have to cross. And then there's also a section 2 on the judgment. And then we finally get to the pit of smoke, stench, and demons. Smoke would maybe imply maybe a fire, but they don't kind of put it out there. So again, the details are kind of graphic, but I mean, those are just sort of some of the early Mesopotamian, ancient Egypt, and particularly Zoroastrianism influences that are going to influence the Greek culture, later the Roman Empire, and then out of that, they're going to influence particularly Babylonian and the later Judaism, right, with the captivity in Babylon, right? So again, all cultures take something from their encounters with other cultures and start grafting some of the stories or the concepts on to try to make it their own and put their own little kind of spin on it. And this is where this concept of hell kind of comes from. It's been constructed along the way when we start thinking about the afterlife. And for human beings, we worry about an afterlife. That's a concern for a lot of people. And it became an even bigger concern when a lot of people couldn't think that once I'm gone, I'm nothing, right? There is no more existence and being. There's just something within humans about, well, we have to continue on after, right? We're living in some form or fashion. We hope it's in paradise, but again, the binary construction is to help you live on earth, maybe not. So it's just that concern for our own being afterwards. Can we just go to nothingness? A lot of people's egos won't let them go there, to think about death and the afterlife in that sort of fashion. So I'll leave some time for some comments or questions here. Yeah, and Corinthia's got the microphone there. And again, let me stress, I am not an expert on hell. I'm really not. I've done some study and I've pieced together some stuff that I share with students, but I don't claim to be the expert on hell. Now, my students might tell you otherwise. I don't know. But anyway, go ahead.
Three were quick observations. Back to that map.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting trend. The red countries,
Yes.
with the exception of China, which is communist and no religion at all. The rest of those countries are primarily Islamic.
Yes.
And except for the real bright red one, I'm guessing is Sarajevo. And then as the further north you get, the greener it gets.
Yeah.
Western Europe, which has slowly become more secular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just an interesting commentary. Now back to
And I will say, I think that's where the orange between those years reflects this split in U.S. America and North America, kind of, particularly U.S., that secularism versus more the evangelicalism kind of beliefs, too, that kind of get incorporated to make it more the 60 to 70%. Because, gosh, I would have expected that number to be a whole lot higher. So anyway, I didn't mean to, but that's a good point, the secularism of Europe.
and I've said hell is other people, I've heard. And also, about 30 years ago, there was a big revival of the big band era, and there was a group called the Squirrel Nut Zippers
Yeah.
that had a song called Hell.
Very
And
cool.
it's like, you make the scene all day, and tomorrow there'll be hell to pay. And then there was something about wearing a suit of flame.
Okay.
And it's just like, yeah, that's still stuck with me all of these years, because the imagery in that was really interesting.
And thank you for that suggestion. I wrote that one down because I'm always looking for songs, because when I do it as a class, when we start the morning, so the first day is Highway to Hell, usually AC/DC, and we do a lot of, there's some country music songs and stuff, so I'm going to add this one into the repertoire now for the class when I do it again.
I appreciate you. I see a lot of history of religions and world religions. So I see most of this is the binary. So I'm wondering, because I don't think it's unique to Christianity and Judaism, that, if you look at it from a human development and faith development, then a lot of religions will go to the binary, then non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of at the higher development, like when you reach the deconstruction, because I think for a lot of us that hell doesn't make sense from a theological perspective.
Exactly.
And I'm wondering, is that also hold true with other religions? Do they reach that point of deconstruction where, like, well, this doesn't, it creates some cognitive dissonance, and so you begin to push back and kind of redo your theology based on that. Is that It's not
Yeah.
unique to Christianity, right?
I mean, that's a great question, because I know within other world religions, and I'm not the world religion expert, but within other world religions, you have this kind of postmodern Enlightenment era, creations of different ways to think theologically about interpreting your sacred text. And to start to question some of that. And I think you see some of the how we can have differing views. I can't speak on the concept of hell for Islam or for Judaism, but you certainly see within Judaism and some of the more modern conceptions about the different groupings, right? And you see that within Islam as well. And so probably more modern notions and scholarship within scholarly circles kind of pushing some of that deconstruction, you may start to see that more. I can't speak to that on hell for all the other world religions, but you see it in Christianity for sure, that a lot of folks there's a lot more, let me tell you, academic articles and books on this concept of deconstructing hell that have come out within the last 10 years. And again, I think to kind of counter some of the rise of fundamentalism, evangelicalism, that still wields this concept, this idea over people in that spiritual sort of abuse kind of way. So yeah. But I would bet you would see that. I bet you would see, if you, for those folks who do study world religion, that you probably see some pockets in Islam and Judaism. Well, I mean, early Judaism, there was no concept of hell. I mean, hell just didn't exist. And then a version of it kind of got picked up, right? But within Islam, who did have a concept of hell, and Buddhism and stuff, probably you're going to see some variations there. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody's looked at, if hell is a construct, then heaven is a construct.
Bart Ehrman's book, Heaven and Hell, exactly.
But if you did a map like this where you asked people who believes in heaven versus who believes in hell, would there be a difference?
That's a great question, and I bet there would, because again, we want to live forever. Right? We really do. And so this concept of heaven may equally just be as much a construct, but then this idea of living your life on earth, wait a minute, we all get to go? No, my neighbor over here did this and this and this, right? And so that idea of judgment that then kind of comes in.
But isn't that just transference?
It is. And it's all part of that construction. And that's why I think a lot of times even religion itself is a social construction to help us make meaning for our lives. Yeah. Right? And every culture has a religion that tries to explain things to them to help make meaning for life in community here together for a period of time. But yeah, thank you. I would bet the numbers would be a lot higher. Anybody else comment or question? Got a little bit of time left.
This is just a personal curiosity that I have. And speaking of just 21st century, we often hear of, and I've had friends that this has occurred with, where they have near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And we hear the comments of a place of peace. Some even call it heaven. Mm-hmm. Has there been in the 21st century anybody who has had a near-death experience but glimpsed the pits of hell?
Oh yeah, there have been some of those that they come back then, and that's when they turn to preach and to convert and those kind of experiences. Okay. Yeah, and even going back to Zoroastrianism and Artavarif, right, got a glimpse of what hell would be like to come back and tell others. Then this is how you have to live your life. So it becomes this kind of genre of experiences, a genre of writing as well, to help people how to live here on earth together, right? Because otherwise these bad things will happen to you. But Donald, your concept, even the good place, right? Some of the modern kind of pop culture influences there, right? That kind of help us wrestle with some of those theological constructs there.
So with these three religions that you've kind of covered, where did they start doing rebirth, getting a second chance in life? You'll come back and be recreated in another life. Did that ever occur at this point in religion?
I think there may have been some variations of that idea of reincarnation. That, I think, comes more out of a lot of the Eastern religions, Buddhism, and some of those that kind of want some of these ideas about afterlife, or they already had their own ideas about afterlife, kind of come into play there. But again, Judaism that doesn't believe in hell is going to encounter a Babylonian culture and other influences, right, that does have a concept of hell. And so then things get to change. And then Christianity coming out of Judaism and their kind of new constructs of what an afterlife experience is, and some of the words and the framing and the translation, they get picked up on. And so that's kind of what we'll talk more about next week, in how specifically from Greco-Roman culture through Judaism and then to Christianity, how we get some of these concepts. With translation. It's all about how we translate words too, and the language that we use. So, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As Dr.